Over 40 years have passed since Thor Heyerdahl made his epic voyage across 4,000 miles of the Pacific on that legendary balsa wood raft, the Kon Tiki. Since then, one question above all has shaped his life and thought. How and when did early man first learn to navigate across the world's oceans? It was on the tiny Polynesian island of Fataheva that the question first took a hold on his mind. As a young man of 21, he'd come here with his young bride to escape from what he saw as the iron grip of modern civilization. And once there, he grew more and more interested in the indigenous people. How did they first arrive? And what kind of cultural heritage did they bring with them? After Kon Tiki, the quest led eastwards. First to the Atlantic, which he crossed in a reed ship in 1970. Then eastward once more, this time to the very cradle of civilization, where he built the largest of his reed vessels on the banks of the river Tigris. With each new voyage, he set out to discover for himself just what early navigators might have been able to achieve with the vessels at their disposal. One man who's been with Thor Heyerdahl on no less than 3 of his expeditions is Norman Baker.
Would you say that Thor Heyerdahl,
I asked him whether he thought Thor had permanently changed our perception of early ocean navigation.
Oh, I think that is without a doubt the fact. Thor has the greatest field experience of any anthropologist in the world today. And all of his logic just simply fits in. Everything that he thinks may have occurred has backing for it. And he has the field experience, the eyewitness of areas and artifacts that back it up.
He's been accused of forming the theory and then going out to find the evidence.
That isn't true. You see, what Thor does is he first is aware of the evidence. Just simply by being out there, the evidence trickles into his brain, and he stores it, and he remembers it. He's got a vast memory. And then, when he sees that something may have happened, and yet other anthropologists doubt that it could have happened, because after all, Dr. Heyerdahl, this is the years before humankind invented ships. And he said, well, yes, wooden ships. But they had reed boats then, and maybe the reed boats could have crossed the oceans. Or they had balsa log rafts, and maybe the balsa log rafts could have crossed the oceans. And of course, these landlubbers say that's impossible. You can't cross an ocean in a boat made of reeds. Are you silly? And so what he's done is he simply built the ship to test the equipment that was available to the sailors of 5,000 years ago.
To the south of the Indian subcontinent, a huge archipelago of tiny islands lies scattered on the surface of the ocean like beads from a broken necklace. These are the Maldives.
Well, after the Tigris expedition,
It was this photograph of a carved head that first brought him to the islands in 1983, together with a fellow Norwegian, Bjorn Bai. Carried out of the museum for their inspection, it looked like the head of a Buddha. But they knew very well that the Maldives had been Muslim for over 8 centuries.
That's a Buddha. It's very heavy. And of course the ears are long. Ears. Something that Buddha had from his ancestors.
Behind a locked door in the museum, still more mysterious carvings came to light, hidden away because the law of Islam forbids the representation of the human figure. One of them was completely covered with the heads of ferocious-looking demons, most of them with feline corner teeth and extended earlobes. These pagan images had nothing to do with any of the established religions of Asia. Here was something much older and more primitive. Thor had seen statues with extended earlobes in various parts of the world, on Easter Island, in Mexico, and in the Indus Valley. Now, here they were again, on a remote island in the Indian Ocean. Behind the door of that locked room, they found something else. A broken fragment from a stone plaque, covered with hieroglyphics.
Then there's some signs down here that continue. It's broken a major part. Are the hieroglyphics not yet deciphered from the Indus Valley? For instance, the swastika is typical.
He was certain now that he'd have to return with a fully equipped expedition. His chance came in the following year, when he was offered the use of the Maldives hospital ship, the Golden Ray. As if to welcome them into those friendly waters, a school of dolphins laid on a spectacular display.
They're coming up again. There, look. Well, there are many. Lots of them.
One of the archaeologists was his old friend and colleague from earlier expeditions, Arne Schjølsvold. On the ship's chart, a local historian had traced the supposed migration route of a mysterious prehistoric race called the Reddin. According to legend, they'd come from the north, gradually spreading from island to island. It was just the sort of story to alert Thor Heyerdahl, who decided to alter his plans and call in at the island of Nilandu. It was once occupied, so it was said, by the mythical Reddin.
Hello. Good to see you. Good to see you again.
The people who gathered to greet the team seemed to have such a mixed ancestry that it was impossible to tell what the original inhabitants might have been like. In fact, it was quite likely they'd all been killed or driven out. As for the present population, once they knew the purpose of this unexpected invasion, they were more than willing to produce various fragments of masonry that had been discovered over the years, most of them as mysterious to the local people as they were to the visitors. The team set to work immediately, knowing they had just a few hours at most for a job that might well deserve weeks. The first object to be unearthed was an umbrella-shaped carving. It might have adorned a Buddhist stupa or a Hindu temple, but it would have had no place on a mosque. In the same trench, they found fragments of carved limestone, which looked as if they'd been deliberately split down the middle. They soon discovered why. If the various pieces could be fitted together, they would be the right shape and size for a lingam, or phallus, which plays a central role in Hindu fertility worship. And fit together they did. Only one had survived intact, of precisely the shape and size that can still be seen throughout the Hindu part of India, and as far north as Nepal. This young girl from the foothills of the Himalayas, going about her daily devotions without a trace of self-consciousness, had once had her counterpart far to the south in the Maldive archipelago.
I propose a toast for the success of 45 minutes of digging the first tunnel. To the Maldives.
Not far away stood a simple stone mosque, but it was not quite as simple as it looked. Thor noticed that although the worshippers prayed in the direction of Mecca, the foundations of the building itself were aligned along the path of the sun. Was it possible that ancient sun worshippers had made use of this place, before the Muslims came and even before the Hindus. The masonry displayed the same precise craftsmanship which Thor had seen so often in South America and on Easter Island. Now here it was again on the opposite side of the world.
Björn, I don't have to eat my hat.
You're lucky. I brought salt in case you needed it.
You see?
In fact, there was never much danger that he would have to make a meal of his famous hat. This worn and eroded mound nearby was also aligned along the path of the sun. It was a fair bet that this was the remains of a small temple pyramid, and that a flight of steps leading to a ramp would be found at its base.
I don't have to eat it.
Watching the faces of these villagers, Thor wondered again how many waves of migration had swept through the islands to produce the present population. Before the Muslims, Hindus, and before the Hindus, sun worshippers. The Maldives were beginning to prove a rewarding hunting ground. In the evening, a rich haul of archaeological finds was carried down to the beach, destined for the museum in the island's capital, Malé. It was too soon for detailed conclusions, but much of what they'd found suggested the possibility of early migrations long before the Muslim religion was imposed throughout the Maldives in the year 1153. Long before, what did it mean? Hundreds of years or thousands? When did men first learn to use the winds and currents of the Indian Ocean? That was the fundamental question. And did they start, like Kon Tiki himself, by following the path of the setting sun? Next morning, the Golden Ray set a course for an island on the eastern edge of the archipelago. The local historian, Mohammed Lufti, announced that he had a surprise in store. And suddenly, there it was. A huge mound dominating the island of Isdu, the highest piece of ground in the whole of the Maldives, and obviously made by man. Thor asked Lufti the significance of the name Isdu. He was told it meant land first sighted. But that could hardly be the case if the migration route to the islands had been from the north. On the other hand, the mound could have been built by Buddhists sailing down from the northeast by a second migration route through the Bay of Bengal. For them, it might well have been land first sighted. Thor Heyerdahl's principal objective lay still further to the south. For mariners travelling from east to west, there are only two navigable channels through the islands. Their destination, for what Thor hoped would prove to be the climax of the expedition, was the island of Gaf-Gan, just north of the equatorial channel. What could be more natural for ancient sun-worshipping people than to build their sacred monuments on the islands that lie directly in the sun's path? Whatever lay beneath this thick undergrowth had been undisturbed for centuries. and since there were no people living nearby, there was a good chance that nothing had been willfully destroyed. Clearing a path through the thick foliage, the local people led them towards a large mound. Would it prove to be another pyramid? By now, they were accustomed to finding objects of Hindu or Buddhist origin. But suddenly, here on the equator, they were confronted by something quite different.
Come here and see what the same symbols like we found last time. The sun.
As the loose earth was cleared away, sun symbols began to appear. On all the islands to the north, there had been none, but here they seemed to be in abundance. Thor noticed that some of them were partly covered by white plaster, probably the work of later arrivals who wanted to obliterate these pagan images.
The sign of the eyes, which is very common also in the Maya territory. They have the mask of a human skull in the walls of temples. So I think this is something really.
It was clear now that this was indeed a pyramid, with its distinctive ramp virtually identical to those in Mesopotamia, except for the sun symbols which adorned each corner. In the surrounding earth, they found a fertility token made from rock crystal, a substance unknown in the Maldives.
Very typical for the ancient, you have it in Mohenjo-Daro.
Chinese pottery came to light, and beads made from agate, most probably brought from the Indus Valley.
Easy to identify for a mineral, or just you can find out where it comes from.
Another load of valuable finds was carried down to the shore, while the team assembled on the pyramid for an expedition photograph.
Okay. Finish.
The sheer speed with which one discovery followed another had been almost too much to absorb. Many months of detailed work lay ahead, but Thor was sure now that the equatorial channel running through the Maldives had played a major part in the maritime commerce of the Indian Ocean from very early times. And one more compelling piece of evidence lay close at hand. Freshwater lakes are almost unknown on atoll formations, but on this island, lying right in the middle of the channel, they found one. As a secluded swimming pool for the team, it could hardly be better. But how much more valuable it must have been as a source of fresh drinking water for those early navigators on the long voyage across the ocean. The sight which greeted Thor Heyerdahl next morning must have seemed like a phantom from the past. A raft lay drifting in the bay, which bore such a close resemblance to the Kon Tiki that memories of 40 years before came flooding back.
They've had storage place exactly as we had on the Kon Tiki also, in between the deck and the main.
Abandoned, but still seaworthy, fishermen had found it on the previous day. But where had it come from?
The remains of the fire, they've been cooking, they've been...
In the cabin they found their only clue, the remains of a label from a food jar. The writing was Burmese. Nowhere in the world has the Buddha been more venerated than in Burma. From a single vantage point like this one, 7,000 pagodas can be seen. One temple contains 500,000 images of the Buddha. If a flimsy bamboo raft, with or without a crew, could make the 2,000-mile journey from Burma to the equator, then one more migration route to the Maldives had to be seriously considered. Just as Thor and his team were about to make their farewells, Mohammed Lufti reminded them that this was the very island where that fragment of limestone had been found, covered in hieroglyphics. It had long been assumed that the rest of the plaque was lost forever. But was it? The women, who used the village well every day, were much more interested in keeping their feet dry than their own mysterious past, and none too keen when they saw their simple stepping stones turned over one by one to reveal priceless evidence, this time linking the islands with the ancient culture of the Indus Valley.
But this one has the hieroglyphics to the one
How many pieces
we brought last time.
This time also I found it and lost it.
The history of the Maldives is baffling in its complexity. But their importance as a kind of crossroads in the middle of the Indian Ocean was confirmed for Thor Heyerdahl when the islanders produced some of their unique cowrie shells for his inspection. This was the final piece of the mosaic, which made sense of all the rest.
It was a kind of universal currency almost.
Yes, there was some religious superstition tied to it, obviously, but it was used as a money, as currency, in wide parts of Asia and all through Africa.
Before Thor Heyerdahl's expedition, virtually nothing was known about the early history of the Maldives, and very little about navigation in the Indian Ocean. Now there was clear evidence of maritime traffic long before civilization spread from Asia to Europe, and evidence too of a sun-worshipping people who had established themselves on the island before the arrival of the Hindus, the Buddhists, or the Muslims. But where had they come from, this mysterious race to whom the local people gave the name of Reddin? Thor Heyerdahl had found no trace of those distinctive Maldives sun symbols in India, Sri Lanka, or even far-off Indonesia. Early in 1988, I went with him to the seemingly arid and desolate landscape which covers much of South Yemen. But first appearances can be deceptive. This is the ancient city of Shibam, a medieval Manhattan made entirely of mud. It lies inside the Wadi Hadramut, a broad and fertile canyon carved out of the desert by a mighty river millions of years ago. As so often in his life, Thor was acting on a hunch. In this case, little more than a verbal coincidence. A total stranger had written to him about a prehistoric people called the Redan, who were said to have controlled the entrance to the Red Sea. Reddin, Redan. It seemed a forlorn quest. But archaeology is much like building a house. Each piece of evidence may be of no more significance than a single adobe brick. But once in place, the grand design begins to emerge. Almost the first thing we saw on the ancient mud walls of Shibam was a sun symbol with its distinctive rays, very similar to the ones Thor had found in the Maldives. The local people had no idea what it represented, but an old sage was produced who immediately identified it.
The symbol of the sun.
With this dots.
Yes. Yes.
Inside the Sultan's palace, now a museum, another revelation was waiting. A pile of Maldive cowrie shells, once the common currency of the Indian Ocean, had been carefully preserved.
Are there any doubts left in your mind now?
No, there is no doubt in my mind. The people who settled the Maldives must have come from the southern part of the Arabian Peninsula. What we've been looking for in India and Sri Lanka and even Indonesia, that is the motifs on the temples in the Maldives, we find them all here. And we have even seen that the Russian archaeologists excavating this area have found money cowries from the Maldives. So we have double evidence that this must have been the homeland of the legendary Redin of the Maldives that can again be identified with the Redan of this country. And the founder of this city, he or his descendants took the title as kings of Hudramut and Redan.
Unlike the interior, the coastal region of South Yemen is an arid and forbidding wilderness. It's almost impossible to believe that such a place could ever have sustained an important harbour, or for that matter needed one.
There's room for an enormous number of ships. You think the whole
Thousands of years ago, this had once been a great port called Kana.
Right here is Kana. And you know, when the Phoenicians came here, they had the dream island notice. Their first choice was always to find a little island where they could turn around if the wind changed and have security.
At one end of the bay stands a huge rock, like a natural fortification. Below these forbidding ramparts, a team of Russian scientists have been excavating an extensive system of wharves and warehouses. What they found had apparently been no mere fishing village, but a bustling seaport, which served the inland cities of Arabia as well as the long-distance mariners plying their trade between Africa and India. If I had some difficulty in imagining it, Thor had none at all.
From the moment man was able to build navigable craft, he had no problem at all coming down. This is the open Indian Ocean in front of us. I've been navigating here myself with the Tigris outside here. Straight across here you have the Maldives. They had contact with this area. They are in between ancient Egypt you have had on one side and the Sumerians on the other side. We start to think all the time that you have three civilizations, Egypt, Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley. And we wonder, how did they have contact? Well, the sea tied them together. It didn't split them apart, it tied them together.
Why shouldn't we regard one of them as the cradle of civilization? Mesopotamia, for instance, with its legends of the Garden of Eden.
I think that the beginning of all is still not open to the eye. Archaeologists will find it either below the sand. So much is covered by sand and jungle humus, or maybe below the ocean. 70% of this planet is covered by ocean.
And a steadily increasing wilderness of sand. The next stage in our journey was the Sahara, already the world's largest desert, and inexorably spreading southwards every year. But it wasn't always so. Here in this harsh African landscape, there's a poignant reminder of another gentler age. Of all things, we were looking for a weeping cow. Just why, perhaps 5,000 years ago, the artist chose to portray the animal in this way, we shall never know. But there could hardly be a better memorial to the calamity which befell this once fertile region of North Africa.
We will go faster.
Just a few days' journey away, in a region known as the Tassili Plateau, there are cave paintings as old as any in the world. Thor was determined to see them for himself. With us was Thor's friend Ben Amara, a fair-skinned Berber whose ancestors once grazed these lands before the desert took over. 5,000 feet high in places, the Tassili escarpment rises out of the surrounding desert like the battlements of some enormous fortress. The only water to be found anywhere was the meagre ration we carried with us. and yet we knew that a settled community of human beings had once flourished here, surrounded by all the necessities of life. If this place could change so drastically, then who could say what secrets still lay buried, perhaps forever, beneath the ever-shifting sands of the desert or the heaving oceans? At last, the long uphill struggle for man and beast was over. We found ourselves on a great plateau where the walking was easy. Leaving the animals at our campsite, we plunged still further into that unearthly landscape. All of us had the sensation of being on another planet. Our own world of animals and vegetation was somewhere far below.
وهنا كاين التصاور هنا كاين التصاور كاين لي بيرسوناج كاين لي بوبيدي ايه هذاك واش كاين هنا.
Then, quite suddenly, all around us was the proof that this place too had once been bursting with natural life. People had grazed their domestic animals. Lakes and rivers were full of fish. Rhino and elephant had shared the same pastures. Who could say? Perhaps it was here, deep in the Sahara, that civilization had had its beginnings. The oldest paintings so far discovered on the Tassili Plateau date from 9000 BC. The latest from around 4000, predating the pharaohs by 1,000 years.
Well, here you have two of the famous boats from the Tassili Plateau. You can clearly see they are reed boats because no wooden vessel would have a curve like that. And you can see the cabins on deck, the two round bumps, indicating that they are really big boats.
Yeah, they look just like the ones on the Egyptian tombs.
Exactly.
But there are no temples. There's no evidence that there was a great civilization here.
Well, you know, at this period, all the things they depict are human beings and animals and boats. So boats are obviously more important to them in this period than any kind of temple.
There's obviously some sort of a hunting party moving through.
Yeah.
So what kind of country do you think we had here?
First of all, I mean, you wouldn't have had boats unless there was a lake or something, and the rivers. And you have evidently grassland, since these horned animals would have to feed.
Quite. Do you think that a river would have been running right through where we're standing?
Oh, definitely. I mean, this is a typical river canyon.
A dramatic change in the climate forced an entire community to abandon the dwindling lakes and rivers of the Green Sahara. Some moved east towards the Nile Valley, others went west towards the Atlantic. With his two RA expeditions, Thor Heyerdahl had already shown that some of them might have set out to cross an ocean, not knowing if there was anything to be found on the other side. But who were they, these intrepid voyagers? Starting with the man-god Kon Tiki himself, wherever his expeditions had taken him, Thor Heyerdahl had seen images and heard legends of white and bearded men setting out across the ocean to find new lands in the west. From Egypt to Mexico, from the Maldives to Easter Island, similar legends keep recurring. And in various cultural disguises, the same bearded figure appears again and again. Of course, it's impossible to prove that all the stories are really one story, or that all these images are somehow related. But for a long time now, Thor has come to think of it as something more than a coincidence.
Now, what you're not saying, and I think you've been misquoted on this, is that only white and bearded navigators could have made these journeys.
No. I mean, of course, you don't have to be white to be a navigator, nor do you have to be a European to be white. The most crazy thing is to believe that because you find legend about the white people, that they have to be Europeans. You had people with what we call white skin, fair skin. All of North Africa had a white population before the Arab invasion. The Berbers were white-skinned and red-haired. You find them still in the Atlas Mountains.
In Thor Heyerdahl's view of the world, the 7 oceans are really just one, in which the continents are islands. Early man, he believes, crossed and recrossed the Indian Ocean many times. He doesn't even dismiss the possibility that Asian navigators might have found their own route to the New World round the Cape of Good Hope. With the voyage of Ra-2, he himself had bridged the Atlantic. And with the Kon Tiki, he'd crossed 4,000 miles of the Pacific, from America to Polynesia. And always the movement had been westward, with the prevailing winds and currents. Even after a lifetime of travel and discovery, it's Easter Island, the most isolated speck of inhabited land in the world, that still remains the focal point for all his theories. The place means more to him than anywhere on Earth. It's become a kind of spiritual home. Nevertheless, it's here, of all places, that he still remains a rather isolated figure. World famous though he is, and much honoured and admired, the fact remains that a substantial number of his fellow archaeologists still maintain that the first migrations to Polynesia came not from America at all, but from the East. Thor is like a prophet not yet received in his own country. Two years ago, he was back at work once again, still looking for the vital evidence that might clinch the matter once and for all. His friend, Arne Skjølsvold, was involved in a new excavation at Anakena, the place where Thor had first set up camp 30 years earlier.
So, has this particular excavation modified your views at all?
No, it has confirmed my view. My view was that the first people who came here came from South America with a ready developed skill in stonework of this type. They would not be able to come from Polynesia as wind-driven fishermen with an art as perfect as theirs. Yeah. And this is what I maintained all the time.
And has anything else been found in this particular hole?
Well, in this particular hole, there have been a lot of carbon, so we will be able to date this early structure, but we can't do that unless the carbon has passed through the laboratory.
No. And human remains?
We also find human bones, particularly high up. We found a lot of burials.
Another new discovery is this beautifully constructed stone wall, just to the landward side of a line of statues.
Well, here you see an early wall still intact, of the same kind of facing stones as we had done in the hole.
Now, would this have been built for the statues as a platform?
No, this was earlier than the Ajo period. This is what we call the middle period, and nobody knew before we started digging that there was anything at all before this.
The most celebrated example of such highly skilled masonry work is at Vinapoo on the other side of the island. Nothing of this sophistication has ever been found on Polynesian islands to the west. For Thor, the culture links stretch eastwards, to the pre-Inca period in South America, and eastward again, to the ancient civilizations of the Old World. I asked him whether there were any further doubts in his own mind, or were the principal mysteries of Easter Island finally solved?
I think that we can say with certainty today that the first people who came
came from South America, and they did this astonishing work. And later came the Polynesians. And when Roggeveen and the first Europeans came, they met a mixed population. I think these are the main mysteries. Also, we know why were these monuments carved and erected. They were definitely ancestor figures. So all the other questions, and there are many, when did the first people came, for instance? We don't know exactly. We know we have many dates. For instance, of the wall here, we have a date from the first visit of 800 AD. That's very early. And we are probably now getting even earlier dates. But all these are not the real mystery of the island. It doesn't matter if they came 600 AD or 800 AD.
The question is who they were.
Who they were.
Right, we must assume, I take it, that they were the long ears and that the short ears were the Polynesians.
Yes, because there are no long ears in Polynesia at all. The only island in the whole Pacific where they had the custom of ear extension was here on Easter Island, and it's a typical characteristic of the Inca and the pre-Inca of Peru. We know it from their art, we know it from Inca tradition, where the Incas say that the king Kon Tiki Man, before he left into the Pacific, instructed the Incas in the custom of ear extension.
For many years, ever since Thor's first expedition to Easter Island, the headless torso of a very ancient statue has been on display at the Kon Tiki Museum in Oslo. Now, it was coming home. Scandinavian Airlines had been asked to reserve a seat fit for a queen. On the island's runway, a royal reception was waiting. Embedded in a recently excavated wall, Thor had noticed a large lump of rock. Something about its colour and texture made him wonder whether it could possibly have any connection with the headless statue that he'd found 30 years before. The only way to find out was to bring the two pieces together. If there was a natural join, then this might prove to be the long-lost statue of Queen Averapua, the consort of King Hotu Matue himself, who, according to legend, had first brought his people across the sea from the South American mainland.
Perfect. Really, it's a pleasure to bring it back to your island, to be able to bring something back, and I hope many other people and museums will follow up.
Thor Heyerdahl has had a unique relationship with Easter Island, stretching back over half a lifetime. No other visitor from another land has ever earned such respect and love from the islanders. For the time being, his work here is over, and like any other archaeologist, he expects to see his findings modified by later research. But his fundamental views on Pacific migration, with the story of Easter Island at its very heart, remain as unshakable as ever. The idea that he might one day retire never crosses Thor Heyerdahl's mind. Now, in his mid-70s, he's found an entirely new focus for his prodigious energy. Here at Tucumay, in northern Peru, the largest concentration of pyramids in the world, 26 of them, lie baking in the sun. Thor Heyerdahl has done rather more than pitch his tent by this prehistoric site. He's built himself a new home. Every day he rides out on his horse to supervise the archaeological work, which is being jointly sponsored by the Peruvian government and the Kon Tiki Museum. Unlike Egypt's Valley of the Kings, not one of these adobe pyramids has yet been robbed or excavated, and Thor believes they could be even more important to a full understanding of South American prehistory. Were they the result of a sudden flowering of civilization after millions of years of Stone Age simplicity? Or was there a parallel to be drawn with nature and the slow evolution of species responding to a changing environment?
I don't think that civilization was created 5,000 years ago. I think it was the result of previous evolution. But I mean, if we defend the fact that man was primitive until 5,000 BC and suddenly got civilized in various places, I mean, that's against normal law of evolution. There must be an evolution behind. But of course, that doesn't mean that there wasn't already some kind of background. I mean, man has not lived 5 million years at the same stage all over the world. There were cultures growing up in various places, but I feel that 5,000 years ago, ocean navigation really started and tying together all this, and the influence by people who came for trade resulted in this tremendous bloom of real civilization, about 3,100 BC.
The leader of the Peruvian archaeologists is Walter Alva, who not only introduced Thor to Tukumi, but was recently involved in a dramatic bid to save some priceless relics from a plundered tomb. Here at Sipan, less than an hour away, modern-day robbers got there first. This tomb probably contained some of the finest archaeological treasure discovered in South America this century.
Treasure, huh?
The large treasure of gold for the Sipan. Sipan.
By the time Walter Alva found out what was happening, only the pottery and cooking utensils for the dead king's use in the afterlife were still in place. All the objects made of gold and precious stones had gone. The guards who'd been buried with their king to protect his tomb and its precious contents had clearly failed in their sacred duty. But the local police did better. A few magnificent pieces were recovered from nearby Indians. A gold mask with eyes of lapis lazuli, which could only have come from distant Chile. Another mask with demon-like fangs made of spondylus shell, found on the coast of Ecuador, but not in Peru. Necklaces and brooches of exquisite workmanship, inlaid with turquoise from faraway Argentina. Meanwhile, at Tukumi, 26 more pyramids have been slumbering through the centuries, undisturbed either by man's greed or his curiosity. According to local legend, they were built by the descendants of King Naimlap, who had sailed down from Mexico with a huge fleet of balsa wood rafts. That alone was enough to rouse Thor's curiosity. If this was indeed the hub of a vast empire, unchallenged perhaps for 1,000 years, until it collapsed before the onslaught of the Incas, what kind of secrets might still lie buried beneath these man-made hills?
This is what we are going to find out. It seems to me highly likely that since traditions start with King Naimlap coming down on balsa rafts, that we have to go north to find one link. And we know from what Peruvian archaeologists have already found in Sipan that these people had trade all the way down to Chile.
and all the way up to Ecuador and across the Altiplano to the jungle coast on the other side. So they must have had an enormous impact on all neighboring cultures.
So it's even possible that what's found in these pyramids will settle once and for all whether the cultures of Central and South America grew up in isolation or were somehow linked with the old world.
I think you will always have disputes among scientists on topics like this, and the day everybody agrees, there will be no further advance in science. I mean, you have to disagree to make people continue research to prove their point and find the real truth.
When it's been excavated, will you have filled in a few more pieces of the mosaic, or will this be leading into the future?
We think we know all about the past. And all the time, archaeology discovers another civilization that until very recently was completely unknown. Whether it's Olmec in Mexico, or Hittite in Mesopotamia, or the Harappan civilization in the Indus Valley, a generation ago, nothing was known, and suddenly we find it. And I think that when you, at this time, like me, come walking in here with a Peruvian archaeologist, he says, I'm going to show you something, and we come here in late afternoon light and see this, I felt I was on another planet.